Hi, my name's Lulu, and no, I wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this uniform, not on this base, not in the photo albums my family keeps in the living room back home. At NATO camp, they said I didn't belong. My sister said it first. She can't lift a backpack, she told the others. Why would the army accept trash like her? They all laughed, even the officers. But no one laughed when the KLL code lit up on my wrist, and no one expected what happened next. But here's the thing. What if being underestimated wasn't the worst part? What if it was knowing your own blood made sure of it? I could feel the gravel grind under my boots as I stepped onto the formation field at Fort Carson. Colorado's dry morning chill bit through the stiff canvas of my uniform, but the real sting wasn't from the wind, it came from the eyes. Every glance felt like a judgment. My last name, Ashford, didn't mean much out here, but I knew exactly whose last name did. They called our names one by one. And mine was met with a beat of silence before the officer moved on. No nod, no second glance. And then I heard it, her laugh, that signature clipped tone, too familiar to mistake. Isolde. I turned my head slightly and saw her in full uniform, arms crossed, sunglasses perched like a crown. She wasn't part of this drill. No, she was standing on the sidelines, watching. She can't even lift a backpack, she said loud enough for the nearby recruits to hear. Why would the army accept trash like her? The words cut through the air like they were rehearsed. Some recruits laughed. A couple more turned to see who she was talking about. Then they looked at me, like I was a joke written in bold font. I didn't flinch, not outwardly, but my stomach tightened the way it used to when the teachers at school forgot I was in the room. I kept my stance, arms behind my back, chin up, but inside, I heard the door slam, the one that locked me out of the real family again. Later that night, I found a moment of silence tucked between the barracks' routine noise. Lights Out was still an hour away, and most of the women were doing gear checks or scrolling their phones. I sat on the lower bunk, phone in hand, already regretting opening the family group chat. There it was. A video from earlier, shot by someone with a shaky hand. Isolde's voice was clear, the words looped again. Trash, like her. My brother had responded with a thought emoji. My father, retired Marine, texted, "Hope you survive the first week, soldier." They weren't trying to be cruel. No, this was their version of support. The same way you toughen up a weak link in a chain, shame them until they strengthen or break. Then came Isolde's post, a Halloween photo from when I was 8. I had made my own soldier uniform from cardboard and duct tape. She captioned it, "Always dreamed, never meant it." That one hit deeper than I let show. I didn't react. I just locked the phone and laid it down beside me. The barracks around me kept buzzing. Someone laughed at a meme, another cursed at a tangled strap. But all I heard was that looped line, trash like her. So that's how far the line goes, I thought. It wasn't just strangers now, it was blood. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the discomfort, these cots had nothing on the floors I'd slept on during aid deployments, but because the same dream kept replaying, the one where I was 12, sitting at the dinner table while Isolde received a standing ovation for graduating top of her class at cadet school. I was there too, with perfect attendance awards and a stack of community service certificates, none of which made it into the family photo album. "Lulu, let your sister speak," my father had said when I tried to mention my summer job. This is her night. It was always her night. I remember sneaking into Dad's study later that week. The medals he'd received during his time in the Gulf War were kept in a locked glass case. I'd never touched them, never dared. That night, I just stood in front of them, no dreams of stealing glory. I just wanted to see if I could see myself in the reflection. I couldn't. But they're not here now, I told myself in the present. I am. I slipped out of the barracks and onto the base walkway. The cold air greeted me like an old friend with rough hands. The concrete beneath my boots echoed louder now, almost rhythmically. I stopped beneath the glowing barracks sign and looked up at the window where Isolda's office lights still burned. She was probably debriefing someone, or maybe laughing about me again. Either way, I didn't care. Not in the way they expected me to. They wanted me to retreat, to crumble. Instead, I whispered to the dark, "Let them laugh. I'm not done yet." I didn't expect my name would already be a joke before I even spoke a word. But here I was, walking into my first unit briefing with eyes glancing over me like I was a misplaced form someone forgot to file properly. Nobody needed to say anything. The smirks did the talking. They had stationed me with Squad 9, unofficially referred to as the Deadweight Division. It was the squad where they tucked away anyone they didn't want to deal with, recruits who barely passed the physical, a couple recovering from injuries, one guy who couldn't complete a full march without complaining about shin splints. And then there was me. The first thought that crossed my mind was, this can't be random. Not when my sister was overseeing squad assignments. Isolde had always been meticulous about optics, her career, her reputation, even what coffee cup she used in public meetings. There was no way she didn't have a hand in this. Still, I said nothing. I took my spot at the back of the formation and stood still, just like I'd done at family dinners, there but never quite included. After briefing, we were dismissed for gear inspection. I stopped by the mess hall for a quick lunch, trying to blend into the rhythm of things. That's when I saw it, my name tag. It no longer said Lulu Ashford. Pasted neatly over it, in bubble letters someone had clearly prepared in advance, was a label. Recruit Barbie. I paused, tray still in my hands. A few heads turned. One of the guys sitting nearby elbowed his buddy and muttered, "Guess they're letting dolls enlist now." Another added, "Hope she brought high heels for the hike." I didn't react. I sat down at the far corner of the table, peeled off the sticker, and dropped it into my tray. Not dramatically, just quietly. Nobody owned up to it. Of course they didn't. That's how these things worked. Passive aggression was always safer when backed by group laughter and plausible deniability. After lunch, I headed to the supply room to check on my issued gear. The clerk barely looked up as he handed me a checklist. My boots, standard, uniform, one size too big, nothing new, but it was the field knife that mattered, a clean, simple tool that most didn't think twice about. To me, it was proof I belonged here, not because I wanted to fight, but because I refused to fold. Back in the barracks, I lined everything up along the edge of my bunk, boots straight, tags visible, blade sharp. I took out my journal and opened to a fresh page. Only one sentence. Barbie doesn't carry field knives. I do. As I capped the pen, I found myself replaying a conversation from 2 years ago, the kind of moment that doesn't seem important until later. It was a family dinner, one of those rare ones where we were all in the same room. Isolde had just been promoted to NATO command, and the living room practically turned into a press conference. Dad poured wine. Mom beamed like the mayor's wife at a ribbon cutting. I said nothing for most of the night. Then I finally spoke up. "I've been thinking about applying for training." Mom didn't even look up. "That's cute, honey." That was it. No follow-up, no question. Just a polite chuckle and back to the real star of the evening. I'd gone quiet after that, not because I doubted myself, but because I understood the score. In this family, achievements didn't count unless they came with medals and press releases, and mine never did. As night settled over Fort Carson, I sat at the foot of my bunk, the hum of the ceiling fan above filling the silence. I wasn't angry, Not in the explosive way people expected. It was a slow-burning kind of resolve, the kind that doesn't flare but simmers. They wanted to laugh? Fine. They wanted to slap fake labels on me? Go ahead. But every step I took on that training ground, every mile I marched, every inch I moved forward, it would be mine, not borrowed, not granted, not gifted by bloodline or favors, mine. I closed the journal, slid it under the mattress, and lay back. Tomorrow would be another day in Squad 9, the deadweight division, and I'd make sure the weight I carried wasn't mine to be ashamed of, but theirs to answer for. They called my placement an error, but it wasn't. It was calculated. The night navigation drill had wrapped after midnight. Our squad wasn't expected to finish, let alone succeed, but we did. We completed the course with time to spare, mostly because I'd spotted the route glitch in the GPS about a mile in. I didn't say anything dramatic, just a simple, "We're off by 2 degrees." Our lead hesitated, but eventually shifted course. We passed the checkpoint with the fastest time. No one said thank you. I wasn't surprised. The next morning, our squad leader posted the results on the wall outside the command tent. I walked past them like everyone else, trying not to look too eager. But there was something missing, my name. There were 10 people in the squad. 9 were listed. 9 received commendation ribbons clipped to their training vests. I stood quietly in line, waiting to see if mine had been overlooked. When the officer got to me, he paused, checked his clipboard, then said, "Not here, maybe a clerical error." A guy behind me, Simmons, leaned in and whispered, "Didn't you lead the damn course?" I gave a half smile. Apparently not enough to matter. It didn't bother me the way it might have before. Not after the sticker, not after the barracks smirks, and not after being dropped into a squad of rejects like it was some kind of accident. I didn't need their ribbon. I needed to remember. Later that week, they held a ceremony at the flag circle, base-wide morning formation. Everyone in dress uniforms, boots polished to mirror shine. The sun hit just above the Rockies, blinding and warm. They called names one by one, recognizing squads, individuals, leadership potential. Mine was never spoken. I stood there, motionless, eyes ahead, heart steady. I could feel the presence beside me. Isolde. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word. The microphone crackled, a few final names, scattered applause, then silence. They had skipped me, not forgotten, skipped. I'd worn my uniform with every medal I'd earned before this. Small recognitions from civilian projects, overseas relief work, low-profile certifications most soldiers never heard of, but I stood there invisible, and she, my sister, stood right there and let it happen. After dismissal, I didn't return to the barracks right away. I sat alone at the edge of the track field, letting the wind cut across the open dirt. That's when the memory came in, one I hadn't thought about in years. Isolde's 30th birthday party. Dad was in rare form, raising his glass with pride. "To the legacy of Whitlow women," he said. "Leaders, protectors, no one stronger." Everyone clapped. Isolde glowed. I was at the end of the table, next to the kids. I hadn't been asked to say anything. No one mentioned my name. Later, Aunt Valerie leaned down and patted my shoulder. "You're just a little softer, and that's okay too." I smiled politely, but I remembered the sting in those words. Softer meant smaller, quieter, less important. Now here I was on a military base performing better than half the squad, but still standing in silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because no one wanted to hear it. That night, I didn't eat with the others. I sat in the back of the equipment tent, sharpening my knife, the rhythm steady and low. I wasn't angry. Anger implied I had hope they'd change. No, what I felt was something deeper, something older. I pulled out my journal, the same one where I'd written about the Barbie sticker, the same one I carried through every mock op and midnight watch. I flipped to the next page and wrote, "They erased my name, not my memory. They skip over me, but I never miss." Then I closed it and slid it back into my duffel. They could pretend I wasn't there, but I'd make sure they remembered me long after I was gone. It wasn't just their silence that stung, it was how loud it was. Before the sun had even touched the ridgeline, my alarm buzzed and I was up. No one needed to tell me that physical assessment day mattered, not just because of what it measured, but because of what it gave others permission to say about you. I dressed in layers, tied my boots with more tension than usual, and pulled my hair back so tight it gave me a dull ache behind my ears. I needed that ache, something physical to focus on, to balance what I'd started feeling internally. We lined up just past 0500. The air was still, the kind of cold that slipped into your lungs and sat there like a reminder that this wasn't a place for softness. My name was called. I stepped forward. Weighted pack carry. Go. I threw the ruck over my shoulder and staggered back slightly. Too heavy, much heavier than what we'd been practicing with. The instructor raised an eyebrow. "Move it, Ashford." My legs responded before my mind could catch up. Each step felt like someone was pushing down on my shoulders with a shovel, but I kept moving, biting the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't make a sound. By the time I dropped the pack at the finish line, my arms were trembling. I couldn't hide it. The clipboard scratched. "Struggling with the minimum," the instructor mumbled, not even looking at me. I nodded and walked off. Later that morning, after we were dismissed, I made my way back to the equipment cage. I waited until the staff sergeant turned to help someone else, then reached for my pack and flipped it open. 2 lead plates, hidden inside the inner flap. I didn't speak. I didn't call anyone over. I zipped it back up and returned it to the stack like nothing had happened. At lunch, the noise in the mess hall buzzed at the usual volume. Forks scraping against plastic trays, boots dragging against tile, the sharp clatter of trays being stacked, and of course, the whispers. "She barely lifted it. Maybe next time they'll bring a dolly." Quota girl strikes again. The words weren't spoken directly to me. They didn't have to be. I didn't blink. I focused on cutting my food cleanly. Each slice of the bland chicken breast was deliberate. I took my time, chewing slowly like I was at a dinner party full of strangers pretending they liked me. No one expected me to retaliate. That's what made it work for them. Let the whispers do the heavy lifting. Let the shame settle into the target on its own. After I cleaned my tray and left the hall, I didn't go back to the barracks right away. Instead, I sat on the edge of the obstacle field, where discarded gloves and half-buried shoelaces littered the training ground like casualties of fatigue. It was empty now, quiet, my kind of place, and that's where the memory came in. 17. Regional Science Fair. I had built a model of a desalination system that could function using only solar panels and recycled tubing. It was rough, ugly even, but it worked. I won first place, came home with a small golden trophy and a framed certificate. The next morning, it was in pieces on the kitchen floor. "Dropped it," Isolde said, without even looking up from her cereal. It fell off the table. I remember Mom stepping around it like it was a spilled bag of flour. No one asked if I wanted to glue it back together. I scooped the broken plastic into a shoebox and kept it under my bed until I moved out. That was the last time I showed them anything I built. Now, as I sat alone on the field, I realized something I hadn't admitted until then. They didn't just forget me. They removed me, on purpose, strategically, but now I saw it clearly. That night, back in the barracks, while everyone else was chatting or FaceTiming home, I pulled out my notebook, not the journal. I had another one, smaller, with a grid of dates and initials. I started filling it out. Who had handed me which gear? Who laughed? Who was standing where when names were skipped at formation? What times things didn't add up? Patterns? They wanted to pretend I didn't belong? Fine. So I'd give them every reason to be afraid of how well I do. There's a point where silence stops protecting you and starts building your case. By the time we hit week 3 of training, I had stopped hoping for fairness. I wasn't bitter, just practical. Hope was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore, not when I was being erased in plain sight. I had started keeping notes, not dramatic, not in red ink or capital letters, just names, dates, patterns, who was around when things went missing. Who handled what? Who looked away? That morning, I was assigned to help organize archived strategy files for the base. It was supposed to be routine, digital cleanup, categorizing past simulations for future briefings. Nothing sensitive, just enough responsibility to feel useful without being real. I logged into one of the secure drives. Most of the files were labeled by code, unreadable without a clearance key. But one folder, labeled Live Ops Debrief, Audio Transcripts, had a short audio file that hadn't been properly classified. The name attached to it, Whitlow.Isolda. I clicked play. Let her fail gracefully, her voice said, clear, measured, like she was offering a solution to a staffing issue. She'll fade like she always does. My hand tightened on the mouse, but I didn't pause the playback. I listened to the full 32 seconds. Her tone never shifted. No anger, no contempt. Just calm dismissal. That was the part that hurt the most. She wasn't angry with me. She just didn't think I mattered. I saved the file to an encrypted folder, not to use it right away, but to remind myself that everything I was feeling wasn't imagined. There it was, recorded in her voice. My sister wasn't protecting me. She was planning my disappearance. That afternoon, the command assignment list was posted in the common hallway. Squad rotations, tactical leadership designations. My unit was on the board, listed under Operation Quill Strike, a simulation exercise focused on civilian evac protocols. I scanned the roster twice. My name wasn't there, but the rest of my squad was. I approached the officer on duty, Captain Murrow, someone I'd never spoken to directly. He looked up as I gestured to the board. My squad's there, sir, but I'm not. He blinked at me, checked the sheet, and said, probably an oversight. These things happen. I nodded once, understood, and walked away, but I didn't believe that for a second. After chow, I slipped into the admin tent. No one else was there yet. Lights still off, air faintly cold from the evening breeze coming in through the half-open flap. I made my way to the end desk, where Isolda often worked late. Her chair was pushed in, neat as always. I pulled a page from my notebook, wrote exactly one sentence, and placed it square in the center of her desk. I was quiet because I respected you. That won't stop me from seeing this through. Then I left. I didn't look back. The next few hours passed like any other. We cleaned gear, rotated mess hall shifts, double-checked our kits for morning drills, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't waiting for recognition anymore. I wasn't bracing for more damage. I was preparing. That night, as the barracks lights dimmed, I lay on my bunk and stared at the ceiling. I let my mind drift back to a moment I hadn't thought about in years. I was 21. Just finished leading a summer youth mentorship program that connected local high schoolers to environmental cleanup projects in underfunded counties. My advisor had nominated me for a community leadership scholarship, and I'd won. I remember standing on that stage, accepting the certificate. I was wearing a dress Isolde once told me made me look too wholesome, whatever that meant. My parents weren't there. They had prior commitments. Isolde, I later learned, was on the scholarship board. 3 days later, I received a message saying the award had been revoked. A clerical error, they said. I hadn't qualified. No one ever explained why. I never asked, because somewhere deep down, I knew, and that knowledge had followed me ever since, not as a wound, but as a weight, something I carried the way soldiers carry gear, strapped tight to your back, always accounted for, never dropped. But now I was done carrying it in silence. The next morning, I didn't wait for the system to call my name. I moved before it could erase me again. By 0500, I was already tightening the straps on my gear, every loop double-checked, every buckle locked. There was a night combat simulation scheduled for the evening, but I didn't want to wait until then to be ready. I had this rhythm now: wake, prep, watch. The more I learned their patterns, the more deliberate I became with mine. I didn't speak to anyone at breakfast. My squad barely looked at me, except Simmons, who gave me a small nod on his way to refill his canteen. I returned the gesture. Sometimes, that's all you need. The day crawled by with drills and admin tasks until the late afternoon briefing called for full gear assembly at the North Range. The air was dry, the kind of sharp, quiet cold that usually precedes something going wrong. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the simulated emergency had been issued. Our squad was tasked with securing a perimeter under low-light conditions while navigating uneven terrain. I moved with caution and calculation. Each step was intentional, my eyes adjusting quickly to the changing contrast as we dropped into a shallow ravine. That's when it happened. We were moving single file across the incline. The footing was loose, the rocks shifting under our boots. I heard a grunt behind me, just a split second before I felt a shove to my lower back. I pitched forward, skidding hard across the dirt. My knee caught a jagged edge of stone, and I felt warm blood soak into the fabric instantly. My palms scraped against gravel as I braced the fall. The recruit behind me muttered, "Watch your step." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I saw his face when he looked down at me, too composed, too rehearsed. I pushed myself up slowly, brushing dirt from my uniform. The pain didn't register fully until I stood again, but I forced my breath steady. When we regrouped, the squad leader barked, "Ashford, falls on you. You broke formation." I met his eyes. "Sir, I was pushed." His expression didn't change. "Then maintain your spacing next time." No reprimand to the guy behind me, no offer to check the incline, no mention of the blood running down my shin, just a black mark by my name, again. After the debrief, I limped back to the barracks. The medic offered ointment and gauze. I wrapped the wound myself, fingers steady. I didn't want pity. I wanted proof. Back in my corner, I unzipped my field kit to reorganize and caught the edge of something lodged behind the lining of the main compartment. A folded, creased envelope, yellowing at the corners. I stared at it for a moment, already knowing what it was. Mom's handwriting. The slight curve on the L in my name gave it away. I opened it slowly, the paper soft with time. "Lulu, you don't need to raise your voice to be powerful. I've always known the quiet ones carry the sharpest steel. You won't need to shout to be heard. Trust me. Love you, always, Mom." I read it once, then again. And for the first time since she passed, I felt her standing behind me, not in memory, but in muscle. Her words settled into me like an anchor, not heavy, just firm. I folded the note and slid it into the inside pocket of my vest, over my heart. Later that night, as I lay awake, I thought back to the only time I remember my mother raising her voice for me. I was 10. Some teacher had accused me of copying a classmate's science report. She pulled me out of the cafeteria in front of everyone, saying I didn't look like the type who could come up with that on her own. I went home early. I didn't want to tell Mom. I didn't want her to think I had cheated, but somehow she knew. The next day, she showed up at school with the draft of my report and every note I'd taken over the previous month. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. She just placed the folder on the teacher's desk, looked her square in the eye, and said, "Don't mistake quiet for incapable." That day, I learned there are different kinds of loud. Now, as an adult, I finally understood the lesson. At dawn, I reported to the command tent, document in hand. It wasn't about the shove anymore. I wasn't filing a complaint against the recruit. I submitted a formal memo outlining unsafe spacing protocols during low-visibility exercises. I detailed the uneven terrain, the failure to review hazard points, and cited 3 examples from the past week of similar near injuries. The officer on duty read it twice. "This is comprehensive," he said finally. "It's not personal," I replied. "It's a systems issue," he nodded, slowly. "We'll take it up with training oversight." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My voice may still be quiet, but now it's sharp enough to cut. The problem with wolves in uniforms is they forget some of us were trained to track blood in silence. By the time I reached formation the next day, I could already feel the shift in air pressure. It wasn't the weather. It was the weight in people's glances, longer than usual, not curious, but watchful. Some avoided my eyes altogether. Others stared and quickly looked away. Simmons, standing 2 rows over, gave me a small nod, but it didn't reach his face. It didn't take long to find out why. At mid-morning, while waiting in line at the range tower for our squad's turn at marksmanship drills, I heard a snort of laughter behind me. "Guess KLL stands for kidding, lost, and liability," someone muttered. Another voice chimed in. "Check the group chat." "It's right there!" My hand froze on the bolt of my training rifle. I turned slowly, saying nothing, but it was enough to see the guilt flicker across a few faces. Back in the barracks during break, I logged into the base's closed communication app. It didn't take long to find it. A zoomed-in photo of my wrist, the KLL013 code visible under the cuff of my sleeve. Someone had cropped it and added the caption, "K equals kidding, L equals lost, LE liability." It had already been viewed over 200 times, reacted to, laughed at, shared. I stared at the screen for a full minute before closing the app. I didn't delete the image. Instead, after dinner, I printed it out on the old black and white copier in the admin office while finishing a report. Then I returned to my barracks, opened my locker, and taped the photo inside the door. I wanted them to see what I saw every day, because when people show you what they really think of you, don't erase it, remember it. The next afternoon, during a training obstacle course, I strained my left calf scaling a cargo net. The pain was sharp, instant, but I landed on my feet and finished the circuit anyway. When the throbbing didn't stop hours later, I limped to the medic station. The young nurse on duty, a second-year corps recruit, wrapped the leg in ice and filled out the injury form. "Protocol says we notify your emergency contact," she said, glancing up. I nodded without thinking. "It's my sister, Isolde Whitlow." She blinked, typed something into the tablet, then hesitated. After a pause, she said softly, "It looks like she already signed the form earlier, checked the box for no contact necessary." I didn't ask how. I didn't ask when. I just said, "Got it," and walked out. There was nothing to say. Except maybe, of course she did. That night, I wrapped my calf again myself. No one offered help. I didn't expect it. I propped my leg on a crate under the bunk and lay back, eyes fixed on the underside of the top bed. The silence stretched long until my mind wandered back, uninvited, to when I was 19. I had been hospitalized for dehydration and exhaustion after 2 straight weeks volunteering at a crisis shelter. The heat wave had overwhelmed the facility, and I hadn't taken care of myself. I collapsed during cleanup duty. The ER was full, but they gave me fluids, ran labs, and told me to rest for 2 days. I remember lying there, wondering if anyone had called Isolde. She was stationed just 40 minutes away at the time. She never came. Dad said later, "She's busy, don't take it personal." I didn't cry. I didn't even get angry. But I remembered, now at 32, I didn't need an excuse anymore. I just needed a plan. So I stopped journaling. No more writing down how I felt. That wasn't working anymore. Instead, I started sketching. Tactical layouts, timelines, diagrams. I mapped who entered where, who stood near what, who laughed when something accidental happened. I noted supply chain anomalies, schedule deviations, assignment patterns. I created a secure digital drive, accessible only through encrypted login, and uploaded every image, every clipped audio, every note, not to prove myself, to prepare. If they wanted to keep playing games, fine. But they were going to find out what happens when the person you thought was prey turns out to be the one laying traps. The time for logging ends. The time for orders begins. The next time they looked at my wrist, I was holding command authority, not some sarcastic label in a group chat. The day started like any other. Dew still clinging to the grass, wind slicing through the hills like it had something to prove. Recruits moved around the field with a kind of nervous efficiency. We were briefed the night before that the drill would be large, multi-unit coordination, real-time pressure simulations, command testing, but nobody said anything about a live threat layer embedded into the routine. It happened halfway through the op. We were stationed near the east boundary, doing a mock evac on a downed pilot scenario when the alarms hit, sharp, jarring, and completely different from the pre-recorded drill alerts we were used to. Within seconds, every comlink went hot. Static gave way to one line. Security breach confirmed. Initiate lockdown protocol. What followed was chaos. Units scrambled. Commanders barked confused orders. People looked around, unsure if it was a test within a test or something more. I didn't move. While others grabbed weapons and shouted over each other, I rolled up my sleeve. The wrist scanner pulsed once, then again. KLL's Euromum 3. Active clearance. The code glowed like a fresh wound across my skin, visible even in the early morning haze. I stood still, waiting, not panicked, not frozen, focused. Within 3 minutes, the chop of rotor blades cut through the noise. A black helicopter descended right into the middle of the field. Dust and papers blew into the air. Recruits shielded their faces. General Halden stepped out. No medals, no dramatics, just his uniform and that unmistakable presence of someone who didn't need to explain who they were. He walked right past the confused cluster of commanders and made his way directly to me. Without hesitation, without asking questions, he raised his voice for the entire field to hear. As of this moment, you report to her. Silence. Absolute, not a shuffle, not a cough, just stunned stillness. I stepped forward. Lock down the outer perimeter, I said, voice clear. North and east sectors are compromised. Reroute Squad Delta to assist in evac control. Do not engage unless fired upon. And just like that, they moved. Obeyed. Even the ones who had laughed. Even the ones who had posted the meme. Isolde stood across the field, arms at her side. I caught her eyes for a fraction of a second. She looked at me the way someone looks at a mirror they don't remember buying, confused by their own reflection. Darian Voss from Logistics gave me a single nod. He didn't look surprised. I would learn later he'd been watching my file for months. The drill wrapped 3 hours later. The breach had been simulated after all, an added test layer. Only 3 candidates on the base had clearance to recognize the embedded codes. Only 1 had responded correctly. Me. By sunset, I was in temporary command quarters near the operations trailer. No medals were pinned, no announcements were made, just a silent shift in posture when I entered the room. They didn't talk behind my back anymore. Now they talked when I walked away. I unzipped my duffel and reached for my notepad, ready to log the after action. But something else slipped out with it. A piece of folded paper, soft at the edges from being handled. A child's drawing, done in crayon. Me, in a simple soldier's pose, blue and red lines forming my uniform, and the words printed at the bottom, "To the silent soldier." I recognized the handwriting. The girl from the base cafeteria a few weeks ago. She dropped her juice, and I helped her clean it up without saying a word. She asked if I was a real soldier. I had nodded. She smiled and said, "You're quiet. That means you're strong." And I guess that was enough. I held the drawing in my lap and just let go. For the first time in months, I cried. Not from pain, not from shame, but from the sheer, unexpected release of it all. That night, I walked back to the command tent to turn in my report. On my way out, Isolde was standing nearby, arms folded, waiting. "I didn't know," she started. I didn't stop walking. She added, "I was trying to protect you." I paused, long enough for her to think I might say something, but I didn't. I kept going, not because I hated her, but because I didn't need her anymore. Sometimes the greatest closure is when the door locks from your side. After the encounter with Isolde outside the command tent, I went straight to the debriefing room. It was quiet except for the occasional shuffle of papers. General Halden stood by the window, not in uniform this time, just a plain shirt and slacks like he'd finally taken off the performance layer all of us had been forced to wear. He didn't speak right away. He let me sit, let the silence breathe. "This won't be the last time someone questions how you got here," he said eventually, "but it should be the last time you do." I nodded. "Understood, sir." He didn't ask about my family. He didn't need to. He handed me a file, transfer papers, with a new assignment marked classified. Not disciplinary, not even corrective, just elevation. "Use your discretion and your silence," he added with a half smile. I stood, shook his hand, and walked out into the morning air. Word travels fast on base. Rumors move faster than official memos. By noon, everyone had heard about the code, the command override, the general's arrival. Some stared, some avoided eye contact like I was contagious, but no one laughed. Even Brady, the same officer who once called my wrist tattoo some cosplay gamer tag, avoided the mess hall that day. I heard he'd been reassigned to admin duties off base. No ceremony, just gone. Someone posted a thread on the base's internal forum that evening. "Respect the quiet ones, especially when they outrank you." It went viral within hours. No one dared comment under their real name. The next day, I returned to my quarters early to pack. My time here was over, and I didn't need another ceremony to mark it. My cot was already stripped, my gear squared away in neat rows. At the bottom of my bag, underneath my field jacket and extra pair of boots, was the letter. The one from Mom. The edges were soft now, the crease lines deeper. But her words hadn't faded. I sat for a moment, letting my hand rest on the paper. Then I opened it. not to read it again, but to smooth it flat one last time. I slid it into the inner flap of the pack, zipped it shut, and didn't look back. She didn't need to speak louder than the others. She just needed to be the voice I could still hear. That evening, I crossed the base yard in silence. The tarmac glowed under the floodlights. A chopper waited near the edge, its rotors still, the crew standing by. I didn't carry anything in my hands, just the pack on my back, the code on my wrist, and a memory tucked where no one could reach it. Isolde wasn't there. Not physically. Not emotionally. And for once, I didn't need her to be. But as I passed the admin building, I caught a glimpse of her through the glass. She was sitting at a desk, shoulders rounded in a way I hadn't seen before. A coffee cup in hand, staring out a window she'd never noticed before this week. She didn't move. Neither did I. I kept walking. Inside the hangar, there was a mirror by the lockers, something standard issue but rarely looked into. I stopped for a second, out of habit more than vanity. This time, I didn't look to adjust my hair or check my collar. I just looked. And for the first time in years, I didn't check for approval in the reflection. I checked for alignment. And I was exactly where I needed to be. The chopper lifted off 10 minutes later. No fanfare, no one waving goodbye. And still, it felt like the proudest departure I'd ever made. Some doors you close to protect yourself. Others you close because you've finally walked out whole. Sometimes the most powerful voice in the room isn't the one that shouts, it's the one that refuses to break. Lulu's story reminds us that silence isn't weakness, and being overlooked doesn't mean you're unworthy. Have you ever been dismissed by the people who should have stood beside you? What did you do with that silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters too. And don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw, and powerful revenge stories just like this one.